Hello, I'm Juliette. I'm a coordinator for the One Democratic State Initiative. And I'm here today with Richard Silverstein. I hope I pronounce your name right, who is an independent journalist and researcher. We are going to talk about a lot of different things related to Palestine. We're going to speak a bit about Zionism as well, and different forms of anti-Zionism. Before we start, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm glad to be with you and your audience. I published the Tikun Olam blog since 2003, and I am an American Jewish anti-Zionist, and I also publish at several other publications like Middle East Eye, The New Arab, and a socialist publication here in America called Jacobin Magazine. I'm glad to be with you.
Thank you. I'm very glad to have you as well. Can you tell us a bit what is your relationship to Palestine, and maybe if you said that you're an anti-Zionist, have you always been anti-Zionist, and what led you to it?
Well, I have not always been an anti-Zionist. I was raised in a eastern suburb in a Jewish community that was sort of a conventional Jewish community, suburban, sort of middle of the road politically, and in terms of religious observance. And I was a liberal Zionist, which means that I believed that, and this was the prevailing, and it's maybe still is the prevailing sort of approach towards Israel among American Jews. And it's a belief that Israel is or aspires to be a Jewish and democratic state. And I held this kind of belief for decades, starting when I was a teenager, and I'm in my 70s. So my first sort of consciousness about this was during the 1967 war, when American Jews believed that Israel faced existential danger. And I remember going to a protest or a rally to support Israel in 1967. And that was when my whole engagement with Israel began. And in the last 20 years, or maybe 10 years, I've gradually turned away from liberal Zionism. I don't any longer believe that Israel can be it is a Jewish state, of course. Well, that's a whole complicated issue we can get into. It considers itself a Jewish state. It no longer has any interest in being a democratic state. And I think it's really a misnomer and it's a fallacy that the media and that politicians and American Jews around the world still consider Israel to be a democratic state. It's long since stopped being a democratic state, and that decline started in 1977 when the far right came to power in Israel. And of course, the seeds of the decline of Israel began in 1948 with the Nakba. But it's been a gradual process of sort of a decline in the democratic principles, which supposedly were employed in the founding of the state of Israel. I don't remember what the other part of your question was, but maybe I've answered most of it.
One aspect that was implied in my question that I'm curious about is what made you shift from liberal Zionism to anti-Zionism?
Well, there's a saying in America that a neoconservative is a liberal who's been mugged by reality. It's a saying I've never liked very much because I'm a proud member of the left. Not a liberal, but one time I was. But anyway, that is what happened to me when Israel sort of became more vicious, more criminal, more genocidal, and apartheid was even more sort of self-evident in terms of Israeli society. My views gradually changed and became more radical in terms of the conventional kind of approach to Israel. They became more radical, and that's when I turned to be an anti-Zionist, because if Zionism suggests that Israel can be a democratic state, and I reject the idea that Israel is a democratic state, so I can no longer be a Zionist, and that means that I've become an anti-Zionist. And I no longer believe in the two-state solution. That's sort of the primo kind of aspect of liberal Zionism, is to endorse the two-state solution. And I don't believe that the two-state solution is viable, mainly because Israel vehemently rejects a two-state solution and has for decades. It sometimes gives sort of what's the right word? It gives sort of the impression that it supports a two-state solution. You have some politicians that sort of mouth the two-state solution sort of mantra. You have American politicians who claim that they believe in the two-state solution, and some American Jewish organizations, some of the more mainstream ones, claim this as well. And that's really a chimera. It's a mirage that really kind of insulates people from thinking about what is the right solution. If people believe in this sort of liberal kind of liberal chimera that that there can be a Palestinian state and an Israeli state side by side and living in peace and coexisting, it allows them to sort of live in sort of a delusional state that really does great harm to the reality on the ground, because when Israel engages in genocide, as it is in Gaza, the rest of the world can say that, well, this isn't the Israel that we want to see, and that it's still possible for this Israel to come about if only whatever A, B, or C would happen. Then Israel, it's possible to transform Israel, or for Israel to, get a new government, and that government might reject the previous kind of fascist kind of approach that the right in power in Israel for the last 50 years has upheld. So I think that sort of mirage is really toxic. And one of my sort of bête noire is to denounce liberal Zionism and point out how delusional it is, and how, and I think as a former liberal Zionist, maybe my critique, my anger at liberal Zionism is even stronger than it might be. And in addition to sort of analyzing the situation in Israel and the current sort of fascist kind of government and approach that the country has taken, I also sort of espouse a strong critique of the attitudes of diaspora Jews and American Jews towards Israel. That's important to me as a Jew, to suggest a way of both being a Jew, being an anti-Zionist, rejecting genocide as a Jewish value. And also, now let's get into something important, which is that there are obviously different ways of being a Jew, and there's different forms of Jewish identity. My Jewish identity is based on the biblical, prophetic, universalist values, this embrace of social justice, the embrace of tolerance, the embrace of the idea that all people are entitled to full national political rights, including Palestinians, in a single democratic state, which is what your organization espouses. But I feel it's important as a Jew to demarcate what Jewish values are as I see it, and as I think they should be. Now, what that means is that Israel and the prevailing view of Jewishness in Israel is largely anathema to what I consider to be Jewish values. The Judaism, the Jewishness of Israel embraces apartheid, embraces genocide, embraces racism, embraces mass murder, and I reject all of those principles. You know, you hear the Israeli leadership and Israelis talking about using Jewish biblical themes to talk about genocide, in which they compare the Palestinians to Amalek, which was a tribe that the Israelites exterminated because of God commanding them to do so. They use all sorts of sort of traditional Jewish sources to try to justify and legitimate their own kind of embrace of politics, and they basically are mixing religion and politics. And when you combine religion and politics, just like when you try to combine science and politics, you end up by deforming religion and deforming science in order to achieve a political objective. And that's what's going on in Israel. This is really a political divide, and in which the Israeli far right needs to achieve these political objectives of apartheid, of ethnic cleansing, of genocide, in order to achieve, as I just said, political objectives. And then they use the veneer of religion to cloak what the political objectives are. And I am adamantly opposed to the exploitation of religion in order to advance a political objective. And you know, one of my principal sort of planks of my sort of personal platform, political platform, is that religion and politics are not the same, and B, have to be kept divided in a sense. I mean, obviously, religion is an important part of the Middle East. There's just no way around it. It's also important part of Lebanon, where you live, obviously, and it is important in Israel as well. But there has to be a way in which two peoples and two different religions, or three or four in the case of Israel, have to be able to figure out a way to coexist. And my view is you're never going to eliminate religion as an important component of identity, national identity, or whatever ethnic identity. Religion is always going to be important for many, if not most, of the people who live in the Middle East. So the key is not to eliminate religion, but the key is to transform religion into a non-political sphere. In the United States, we always have a lot of tension between religion and politics here, and a dominant religion is Christianity, obviously. And there are Christian nationalists now, sort of neo-Nazi white supremacists, who are using religion to achieve advance political objectives, as I was just saying. But we have this strong separation of church and state. so that religion doesn't dominate the political agenda of the state. And that's, I mean, I don't want to say that we need to superimpose the American model on the Middle East or on Israel. Obviously, that's a whole set of dangers in itself. But I believe that there has to be some gradual transition in which religion is no longer used as a cudgel to beat minorities like Palestinians within Israel and the Palestinians outside Israel and West Bank and Gaza. And so that's something that is very important. Now, I wanted to also just go into a slightly different subject, and that is the conflation of Zionism and Judaism, which is sort of an ancillary issue. And that is that that Zionism wants to exploit Judaism in order to sort of ground itself among Jews. And it wants to exploit Jewish texts, sacred texts. It wants to exploit Jewish catastrophes, tragedies like the Holocaust, in order to espouse this sort of far-right nationalist political objectives. And so when you conflate them, for example, on the left, some parts of the left, and some parts of the Arab and Palestinian community, not all of the left, but some parts, there is a belief that Judaism, that Zionism, and part of the reason Zionism is so toxic is because of its basis in Judaism. And that is deeply problematic because we have to, for example, if you are a Muslim, you say that Islam needs to inform the political basis of your society, then people can say that Islam is ISIS, Islam is Al Qaeda, Islam is the sort of Islamist fundamentalists. And it's the same thing with Judaism. When you say that Israel and Zionism are based in the Talmud, that's another thing that people always raise, that the Talmud is racist and the Talmud is the basis of Zionism, then you really go into anti-Semitic territory. And that endangers Jews, because even if you're an anti-Zionist like I am, if people paint you with and tar you with the notion that Judaism is at fault for the sins of Zionism, then all Jews are at fault, because all Jews, not all Jews are Zionist, and actually many Jews don't even care about Israel or Zionism, believe it or not. Or they have this sort of vague allegiance to Israel and Zionism. Many Jews don't even, frankly, know what Zionism means if you ask them to define it. So I was saying that the idea that's propounded by Zionists, that Judaism is sort of a foundation of Zionism, that state of Israel is Jewish, is really dangerous, because white supremacists, neo-Nazis, people on what I call the anti-imperialist left, can say, for example, that the Talmud, which is a sacred text, an ancient sacred text of Judaism, is racist and is sort of Judeo-supremacist, and that the Talmud is the basis of Zionism, or the basis of sort of the Jewishness of the state of Israel. And what that does is it tars all Jews whether they're Zionist or anti-Zionist, whether they live in Israel, whether they live in the diaspora, all Jews are at fault for Zionism, for the crimes of Zionism, the crimes of Israel. And that really exposes all Jews to incredible danger. It justifies attacks, physical attacks on Jews, because you're conflating Judaism and Zionism. And this goes to what I was just saying about the sort of integration or conflation of politics and religion. We have to be careful about that, because all religions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, have sort of within them, they have sectarian divisions, right? And so you have the radical fundamentalists, and you have sort of mainstream, and you have possibly progressive adherents of all of these religions. And for me, I reject the idea that the far right in Israel represents Judaism. I think that they are poisoning Judaism by associating it with apartheid and all sorts of other types of crimes. And that's why I personally reject the idea that Israel is a Jewish state. I think it's more what I call sort of pagan idolatry, because it's worshiping land, and it's worshiping these sort of religious holy sites, and the Western Wall, the Kotel, as sort of critical elements of Jewish identity. My Judaism is based on spiritual values, and not on a piece of land, not on some place where Abraham may or may not have been buried, or some place where one of the prophets may have lived in some part of the West Bank or Israel proper. That's not Judaism for me. And it's why, by the way, that the Jewish diaspora has been so successful over time, because we have learned to live our lives outside of Israel. We could say that Zion, not Zionism, but Zion is a kind of a spiritual sort of utopian vision, and not a specific place. That Judaism has never espoused political Zionism per se. Whenever there's a mention of Zion in the sacred text and the liturgy, it's not it's not a space, a sort of physically demarcated space with a political system or anything like that. Yeah, so that's basically a long answer to that question. Sorry.
Thank you. You've actually covered a lot of different things that I would like to unpack a little bit. Maybe before coming back to the question of the Jewish identity, which I really like us to discuss more. I would like to come back briefly on the question of the one democratic state, because you mentioned that for you that you consider the two states as a mirage, which I really like this image. And you've also mentioned this question about the separation between the religion and the state. With the initiative, we talk about the depoliticization of identity, so more than separation, but also meaning it's not just that the church or religion doesn't influence the policies and politics in themselves, but that the people, citizens, the residents are also not distinguished in terms of rights, in terms of political representations, etc., depending on different forms of identity. So I find that there are some similarities between what you said and what we are talking about as well. And that's one of the reasons why, for example, we speak of a secular state. We don't speak of a binational state. This sort of things. And I wanted to hear for you, like, do you have a certain vision of what you think this one state should be?
Yeah, I believe, like you were just saying, that in this single democratic state, that every citizen, regardless of their religion, ethnicity, whatever kind of form of identity you want to talk about, have to have equal rights. And right now, what you have is a sort of layers of rights, and in which Jews have the highest level of rights. Palestinians have the lowest level of rights, and there's even layers within the Palestinian community in Israel in terms of Palestinian Christians having a whole different kind of they're viewed sort of. Israel kind of separates Palestinians in different sort of levels, and Muslims are the most dangerous to this sort of Zionist conception because Israel and Zionism sort of suggest a clash of religions. And Israelis don't have as much problem with Palestinian Christians because Christianity in Israel has never been sort of a militant, taken a militant form. I don't want to make overgeneralization about that because, you know, there are Palestinian Christians who are nationalists. But for example, the Druze and the Bedouin have a different kind of status in Israel because the Druze and the Bedouin have always been willing to serve in the IDF and been more willing to sort of integrate into Israeli society. Integrate not as equals to Jews, integrate as second-class citizens, but some of them, not all of them, but some of them have accepted, more or less accepted, this status and tried to make the best of it within Israeli society. That's why I believe that all adherents of all the religions in Israel need to have absolutely equal political rights. They also have to have equal, I don't know if I want to say religious rights, but they have to have equal rights to practice their religion. As long as the practice of their religion does not interfere with these secular principles, these democratic principles I was talking about, not using religion in order to suppress or dominate other members of other religions and other ethnic groups in Israel. So this means basically transforming Israel from what it is now into, as you were saying, a secular democratic state. Now, the difficulty, obviously, is how you get there, because you have basically currently an Israeli state which is adamantly opposed to transforming itself from what it is, which is a kind of Judeo-supremacist state, and transforming it into a secular democratic state. So throughout my life, I've always believed that sometime in my lifespan, I'm going to see Israel become a liberal sort of social democratic state, a truly democratic state. And I no longer believe that, unfortunately. I mean, it's a real tragedy to me that I don't believe that Israel is going to be transformed anytime soon. I don't know if it's going to take 50 years or 100 years. I don't know if Israel will still survive before this happens. And that's really the tragedy. It's not only a tragedy for the world and tragedy for Israel, but it's a tragedy for me personally as a Jew, because I've come to the unfortunate conclusion that Israel may not be redeemable. I'm sorry to put it that way, but it's sort of like it's a harsh kind of judgment. But there is so much hatred, not only hatred of Palestinians, but just hatred of the idea of giving Palestinians equal rights, the hatred of the idea of giving up Judeo supremacy, even though most Israelis, would reject the idea that they're sort of supremacists, but they are. And that sort of harboring those sets of delusions is what stops Israel from ever being able to consider transforming itself into the kind of state that you and your movement, wants to see. So, I mean, I guess, possibly this kind of approach might be imposed on Israel, but that requires the world and international bodies to come to the conclusion that Israel, as it constituted now, is irredeemable. And global bodies have done that in certain places, especially in the former Yugoslavia, with Kosovo becoming an independent state, and stopping NATO, stopping the Serbia from dominating Kosovo, and stopping the genocide there. So that has happened in certain instances, but I don't think anytime soon, if ever. We could see right now with what's happening in the genocide in Gaza, the world is standing by and doing nothing to stop this. And I don't see any kind of will in the outside of Israel in doing what it would take to transform Israel into this kind of vision that you and I have.
Yeah, actually, I mean, from the perspective of my perspective and the one of the organization is, it's I don't know if it both aligns with it and contradicts it, in a sense that, yes, we consider that it is irredeemable, but that it's by nature, because Israel as a colonial state has, like, is in its DNA, the violence is in the DNA of the colonial state, and that the extreme violence that we see today, and this supremacist mentality is like, it's a natural consequence of the fact that it is a colonial state. And so the one democratic state that we see is not an Israeli state, it's a Palestinian state. It's a decolonized one, where all citizens or residents are considered equally, whether they are Jewish, Muslim, Christians, or others, but it's a Palestinian state. So I don't know if you have maybe thoughts on this, or how do you feel about this?
Well, the question is, how do you change a state that's a colonial state and transform it into a secular democratic state, or into a decolonized state? That's tough. I mean, it's happened, obviously. It happens.
Yeah.
It's happened in Africa, Algeria. It's happened in lots of places that colonial states have been decolonized. But usually what is involved is overthrowing the colonial regime, overthrowing this sort of the nation that has colonized the other nation. So, the European colonial powers were forced, in some cases, or on their own, decided that they were going to give up their colonies, and then those colonies were able to decolonize and become independent. But in the case of Israel, it's a little different, because the notion of the colony itself combines both the colonizer and the colonized, in a sense that Israel doesn't have a colonial power outside of Israel, other than if you want to say that the world is allowing Israel to be a colonial state. And so Israel is the colonial power, and it is the colonized state. But basically, Israel is the colonial power, and it's imposing the colonial values on the minorities. I guess you could say that. So the Palestinians are colonized by Israeli Jews. So how do you overthrow that? There's obviously different ways in which you try to do that. I do it in a nonviolent way. I do it through words. I do it through analysis. I do it through my being a journalist, and my being a witness to the crimes that are being committed, to the Judeo supremacy, to the perversion of Jewish values. That's the role that I play. I think that this is another important subject I'm going to get into, but if you look at the role that Palestinians can play in decolonizing themselves and decolonizing Israel, I think that that's more complicated because I believe, and this is controversial in some quarters, that the Palestinians are entitled not just to armed resistance under UN General Assembly resolutions, repeated passage of these different resolutions, which have justified armed resistance in the face of foreign occupation, which obviously Israel is a foreign occupier of Palestinians, the West Bank, Gaza, and apartheid is the ultimate sort of colonialization principle. So I believe armed resistance by the Palestinians is legitimate. I also believe that because it's so difficult to differentiate Israeli civilians from Israeli sort of security military force, for example, the Israeli settlers on the West Bank are not just civilians, because the whole basis of settlerism in Israel is predicated on violence against Palestinians, and the violence is committed just by the fact that the settlers have stolen this land, stolen the resources, and sort of stripped away any rights that Palestinians have. So I think it's very problematic to try to distinguish between civilians and armed combatants, is what the international Geneva Conventions, the term that is used. And armed combatants in the Israeli context are not just soldiers or police, because they carry weapons. You've got so-called civilians in the West Bank, settlers, who are carrying weapons all the time, and whose very existence is based on violence. So I largely accept the idea that Palestinian resistance, I'm trying to phrase this delicately, that civilians can be a legitimate target. Israeli civilians can be a legitimate target of Palestinians in certain contexts. And that's a radical notion. It's a radical notion even among international law experts, and certainly a radical notion among Jews and Israelis. I'm not saying that there are none that believe this, but I think that we have to grant Palestinians, in the face of existential Israel's sort of attempt to eradicate Palestinians, eradicate them physically, eradicate their national identity, eradicate their possession of land with ethnic cleansing. I think that this is an existential threat to Palestinians, and any people that faces an existential threat is legitimate. It's legitimate for them to use every means to defend themselves and to take the battle to the enemy, to the party that is seeking to eradicate them. It's not legitimate, for example, to call Hamas terrorists, unless you're willing to say that the state of Israel is a terrorist state, which it is. Because what is Hamas doing? Hamas is defending being a Palestinian. It's defending the right to exist in a place, in a state, whatever you want to call it, a state, an enclave. It's defending Gaza. And the Palestinian National Movement has always believed in defending the right to have a state, defending the right to have an identity. And when you try to strip that away, you no longer have any rights to this idea of occupation, or this idea of supremacy, or this idea of sort of extermination. That needs to be confronted with any means that is necessary to do so.
Thank you. Thanks. This is, I mean, I agree with a lot of those things that you have said. And I find it very interesting. I would like also to think, or to discuss briefly, the aspects that are beyond the direct action. So in this how-to, you talked about the place of Zionism in the Jewish diaspora. So today, Zionism is at the center of the organized Jewish community. What do you think can be the alternative to that? And how does it affect anti-Zionist Jews, for example?
Well, I think anti-Zionism is becoming more accepted among Jews, especially among younger Jews. I think the older generation, which I'm a part of, sort of has these sort of long-held views of Israel being a Jewish and democratic state. So this generation eventually will die out and be replaced by a younger generation, which is going to sort of take its place as the prevailing adult generation among American Jews. And I think that means that there will be an growing alienation from Israel, a growing alienation from Zionism. And I think that the war in Gaza has crystallized that, has sort of slapped American Jews in the face, thrown a sort of a bucket of cold water on them, especially these younger Jews. And this is why you see, by the way, protests all throughout American society, especially on the campuses, the encampments, the pro-Palestine, the anti-war encampments. And that's why you see the backlash as well from the Israel lobby and from the Republicans and even from some Democrats against this. But the younger generation of Jews largely embraces this protest movement. Not completely, because obviously there are younger Jews who have the same have been inculcated with the same sort of values as the older generation. But I would say the majority of younger Jews, college campuses, maybe not be anti-Zionist, but they are definitely not embracing genocide, apartheid, which means that they're not embracing Zionism, whether they know that or not. So I think that that's a process that's going to happen and become more prevalent. I think that means that BDS is going to become a more powerful tool to use, and it means that the Israel lobby is gradually going to lose some or most of its power over a longer period of time, because you'll no longer have the wealthy American Jews who endorse Israel, whatever it does, right or wrong. That generation, as I just said, is going to die out, and all of those, the hundreds of millions of dollars that this sort of group of Zionist pro-Israel Jews used to prop up the Israel lobby is eventually going to dry up. Obviously not entirely, but I think there's going to be a gradual sort of cutoff of support, political support, and also financial support. And I think that's why this backlash has been so severe. I mean, you now have you have Jewish groups like well, your audience may not be familiar with these groups, but there's one called Canary Mission, there's one called Beitar. They are compiling lists of Jews and Palestinians, and to target them for either ignominy, attempting to dox them, attempting to destroy their ability to find careers, to find jobs. And then the Palestinian and the foreign international students on campuses, just deporting them. And why you have the Trump administration and why you have Republicans endorsing these crazy fascist kind of policies that Trump is using, of deportation, of kidnapping people on the street and disappearing them in prisons. By the way, this reminds me a lot of the Holocaust, I have to say, where you haven't yet gotten to the point where you're actually killing these people, but you're disappearing them into concentration camps, essentially, and throwing away the key and keeping them incarcerated indefinitely in horrible conditions. And this, as a Jew, is very reminiscent of certain aspects of the Holocaust. And for example, sending immigrants to El Salvador, where they're sort of like disappeared into this horrible system, this prison system, which degrades them as human beings and turns them into little more than sort of animals. And these are sort of betrayals of American values, but betrayal of Jewish values. So that's why American Jews have rejected Republican sort of approaches to these issues, and that's why Jews are increasingly rejecting the Israel lobby itself. It doesn't mean that the Israel lobby doesn't retain a tremendous amount of power, because we can see when they spend $100 million every 2 years during an election cycle to defeat progressive Democratic primary candidates who may be Muslim American, who may be Palestinian, who may be even be Jewish, and be willing to criticize Israel and to try to destroy their candidacy and prevent them from being elected. That bespeaks the continuing power of the Israel lobby. But I think, as I was saying, increasingly, I think Jews are sort of analyzing and interrogating these notions, these beliefs that they've grown up with. And if not sort of radically transforming themselves, at least beginning this process of questioning them and moving gradually towards the kind of perspective that I've adopted. And the reason for my being sort of a little early compared to others is that I'm following this issue very intensely, and I have been for decades. So, I read not only the historical sources and texts of Zionism, but I follow what's going on in Israel and the Middle East every day, and I also follow it with the help of Israelis themselves, who provide me stories to write about and provide me their own perspective, their own internal domestic perspective on what's going on in Israel. And that's put me in a position where I have had to change my views, because I believe that you have to confront reality. You have to confront what is going on, not what you want to see going on, not what you think should happen. You have to confront what is happening. And that's the problem with liberal Zionism. It wants to project this sort of vision of secular, democratic, Israel that can never exist.
So I wanted to follow up. Last time when we stopped, you were talking about the fact that today for the new generation or for younger generation, it's easier for Jews to be anti-Zionist. I'd like to maybe just follow up a little bit about how would you say that now for anti-Zionist Jews, how is it in relation to the more general community, Jewish community? Do they manage to find a community within, anti-Zionist Jewish community? Is it still a bit complicated? And also what more could be needed?
Well, it's a really tough situation for anti-Zionist Jews. Although they're a growing percentage of overall of Jews in the United States, they're still a minority, and that poses problems. There are places, there are venues for anti-Zionist Jews in which they can be comfortable. The largest group is called Jewish Voice for Peace, and it has tens of thousands of members and donors, and it has chapters throughout the country. And for example, I think it's about to have a national conference in the East Coast. So there are places for them. There are also media outlets, Jewish media outlets that are anti-Zionist or tend towards that direction. One is called Jewish Currents. And if you look in certain publications like Haaretz or the Forward, which is another national Jewish publication, you'll find individual articles. The overall editorial slant is liberal Zionist, but you'll find articles that will reflect your own views. So I think it's always tough to be a dissenter. I have a saying that we are, whenever somebody becomes an anti-Zionist, I welcome them as an honorary member to the Spinoza Society for Dissenting Jews, because Spinoza was excommunicated from the Amsterdam Jewish community for his views being outside of the mainstream community. And that's what the pro-Israel community tries to do with us. It tries to sort of read us out of the community. And one of the things that I always do is on social media or wherever somebody tries to say that I'm a bad Jew or I'm not a Jew or I'm a self-hating Jew, I feel it's really important to stake a claim aggressively, directly, to being Jewish, to being part of a tradition of justice and tolerance and peace, coming directly from Jewish sacred texts like the biblical prophets. And I don't cede any ground to anyone who wants to divorce me from my Judaism. And in fact, I believe, and this is a belief that I think is becoming more widespread, that Judaism rejects what Israel is interpreting as its own form of Judaism. The settlers have this hateful, homicidal view that that Jewish tradition sort of ratifies their views. Their attempts to rebuild the Third Temple, destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, those are not, in my opinion, Jewish views. And that's one of my important points that I try to make and try to represent, is labeling, is reading them out of the Jewish tradition as not being Jewish, as being what I call pagan idolaters, because they worship what I call stones and bones. They worship they worship heroes who died for Israel, like the 900 Jews who died at Masada in the face of the Roman conquest, and the stones I'm talking about are the temple. and Jews have never worshipped sacred sites until recently. Judaism was an idea. Judaism could be anywhere in the world. It didn't have to be at a sacred temple. So I want Judaism to be viewed as a moral code and not as a political, cudgel to use against people, and an expression of political power. I don't know if I responded to all of that question, but if I didn't, let me know.
Yes, yes, and actually, one element that you also mentioned it last time, is the fact that the Jewish identity, Jewish value, is opposed to Zionism, which I hear from a lot of anti-Zionist Jew, and I find this actually really interesting, because from the external point of view, this is narrative that is not majority, unfortunately. How do you see that Jews can, in fact, reclaim the narrative?
Well, it's important to, if I didn't talk about this before, to note a distinction between Judaism and Zionism. Judaism obviously is a religion, and it has values, and it has morality and ethics, and the prophets whom I mentioned represented that. And Zionism is a political ideology, and it's a foundation of the state of Israel, and the state of Israel is not a religion; it's a political entity, and it represents nationalism. And as we all know, nationalism taken to its most extreme leads you to places like Nazi Germany during the Holocaust. And that's much of what's going on right now in Israel, is so reflective of what happened in Nazi Germany, genocide and ethnic cleansing and concentration camps. We don't yet have extermination camps, but for decades, one particular Jewish philosopher, Yeshaya Leibovich, in 1990, talked about there being extermination camps. And he said extermination camps not only for Arabs, but for Jews, which is really a chilling thought. And he said the Jews who would be put in those camps would be like him. And I think that is not too far-fetched, because everything that is going on now in Israel has parallels to Nazi Germany. And I've written about that in my blog in the past. So, I think it's really important, because anti-Semites often talk about how Jews are responsible for Israel. Jews are the Jewish religion. The Talmud is the text that they use to say that Jews hate non-Jews and that Jews hate Arabs and that, etc. And I think that that's anti-Semitic, because I view Judaism as a religion of moral and a moral code, as I mentioned. And I do not want anyone to judge Israel, I don't want anyone to judge Jews as representing or having to speak for Israel. It's really important to make that distinction, because if you don't make the distinction, then it puts Jews in danger who are not Zionists. And even Jews who are Zionists, it puts them in danger as well. So in the United States, you have these what I call lunatic fringe extremist groups that are the Jewish pro-Israel groups. One's called Canary Mission and the other's called Beitar. And they have been doxing and informing to the Trump administration on not just Palestinian students, but also on Israeli and Jewish students. And they've just started a campaign to dox Jewish students and say that those students should not be permitted to enter Israel. And by the way, if you are an anti-Zionist Jew or you support BDS, you're liable to be turned back if you try to enter Israel. And I fear, for example, if I went to Israel, that I would be detained and sent back as well for my writing my anti-Zionism. So we need to make that distinction. And I might add that there are people on the left, I call it the anti-imperialist left, who also make that linkage between Jews and Zionism, Jews and Israel, saying that they're basically one and the same thing. And I really think that that's a poisonous, it's a poisonous approach that really leads us down to a dead end.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Something else that you shared last time that I found really, I'd say it was an insight that I rarely heard to this extent. You were explaining how for you it was really the access to information and to data that that led you to become fully anti-Zionist. I know that now you have a blog and you write articles. Can you share a little bit? So how do you see this impacting others who are not yet anti-Zionist? Do you have people come to you and express that this is changing their views?
Well, anecdotally, I would say that that's the case. And one of the reasons why I read the blog and why I publish it, The New Arab and Middle East Eye and Jacobin, is that even for a left-wing audience or a pro-Palestine audience, I think it's important that they hear Jewish voices, so that they know, even if they're already anti-Zionist, they know that there are Jews who are anti-Zionist, and that you know, that people like me see this movement as one of solidarity between religions and between countries and between nations, and between ethnicities, so that we need to be kind of a rainbow coalition of Arabs and Palestinians and Christians and Jews, and Israelis as well. Not that there are that many, unfortunately, but there are some. And we need to not sort of peel off any member of the coalition, for example, the Jews, by saying that you know, they're guilty of the crimes of Israel. And so, and I think it's really important also. One of the reasons why, for example, I participate in the comment threads at my blog is because I want to answer those who are pro-Israel or those who are sort of articulating ideas that aren't really fully formed and that need to hear more historical facts and historical evidence. I think it's really important to educate people and to sort of disseminate your ideas as widely as possible. It's the reason why I spend a lot of time on social media, and why I've gained a following on Twitter, because I want everyone to have access to this information. And a lot of what I do in my blog is talking about history. And because Zionists tend to deform history and try to pick and choose things from Jewish history, and from the history of the state of Israel, to present a lopsided, biased point of view. And I think it's really important to counter that with facts, that are based on evidence, and not sources that are biased, which is often what Zionists do on social media. And basically, there's a battle going on social media for the hearts and minds of people, not just of Jews, but also of non-Jews, of Americans, for example. And we have the Israel lobby spending hundreds of millions of dollars to put forward their, to use money to flood the zone, and with propaganda. And so a small voice I can have in that mix, I want to insert so that people are able to know when there are lies being peddled, and that they're able to learn what the truth is and what the facts are.
Thank you. Thanks. And actually, so along these lines of reaching out and and speaking to different people. So I'm done with the rest of my questions, and usually we ask the people we interview if they can share a message to Palestinians, to Israelis. So since you are talking about the work that you do, reaching out to Israelis, can you share maybe a message for Israelis today?
Well, it's a really, really bad place that Israel is in right now. And I commend all the Israelis who are in the resistance, who are demonstrating and protesting against Netanyahu, and specifically who are protesting against the genocide and who are demanding an end to the war. And I call upon the Israelis, the liberal Zionist Israelis, whose message, in my opinion, is a little bit attenuated or muddled because they've only gone up to a certain point in their dissenting to open themselves or educate themselves about the full extent of the horrors that are being committed in their name, and to join a more radical form of resistance, which embraces Palestinians, which denounces genocide, denounces ethnic cleansing, and supports, as you do, one democratic state. And the liberal Zionists who I've been talking about support a two-state solution, and we've talked about it, I think, earlier. My view that two states is a dead end, and that we have to find a way to get to a one-state solution. Unfortunately, we're not there yet, but we need more Israelis to be willing to say that. And we need Israelis also to vote for parties that are on the left, not what I call left Zionist parties like Meretz and the Labor Party, but true left parties like the Joint List, like the Palestinian parties. That's the only viable direction for politics today, because unfortunately the political realm in Israel is really poisoned by far-right extremists. So as for the Palestinians, I want them to know that they're not alone, that they're Jews. There are many anti-Zionist Jews, and we not only support Palestine, we not only denounce what Israel is doing, but we are supporting the idea of a one-state solution, which is what your group represents. And we want Israelis to understand that the liberal Zionist goal of a two-state solution is a dead end. And we're not there yet, unfortunately, with persuading people about that. But at every turn, when people mention a two-state solution, it's really important that we, Jews and Israelis, stand up and say, for example, when presidents like Macron or others in Europe talk about a two-state solution, we have to really denounce that, and we need Israelis to say that as well, because that's the only way that Israel will ever come around to realizing that the system it has in place, the apartheid sort of genocidal system that they have in place, can't work. So I sort of commend Palestinian struggle, including, by the way, the armed resistance. I think that is really important, not just for the Palestinians to support, but also for anti-Zionists outside of Palestine to support the right of armed resistance against the genocide that the Israeli army is committing.